This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. When I first met Lily Forrester in February of last year, she was homeless in Acapulco, Mexico. She was on the run from the Mexican government. She was on the run from the state of Ohio and the United States on cannabis charges. And she was trying to survive on her own with no money and almost no help. Also, her husband had just been shot to death by unknown assailants, and Lily had reason to believe that they were coming for her. Since then, amazingly, Lily and her life have become almost unrecognizable in wonderful ways. I'm so proud to have her back on the podcast. This is my interview with Lily Forrester. I am joined by Lily Forrester from the mountains of central Mexico in an undisclosed location. And for a lot of you who've been fans of Unregistered, listened to it for a while, you know Lily from the episode last year that we recorded when we were both in Acapulco at one of the most insane, terrifying, craziest moments of my life. And I know for her, it was even more insane and crazy. So we've been friends, good friends ever since then. But I guess I have to formally say welcome to the podcast, Lily.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's good to be back finally.
Yeah, it's funny. We talked every single day for months, and we've stayed in close touch ever since. Although I've been not quite as good a friend because I've been so damn busy with the business. But, it's funny. The last time you were on, we had just met. We didn't know each other at all. But
we were like instant friends when we met each other. Like we met each other the day before we did that. And it was meeting you that I was like, all right, fine. This will be fine. I even told Henza as soon as we left that night, I was like, this is going to be great. This is going to be exactly what needs to happen, basically. And we flipped the narrative, like news stories got changed, after that.
Yeah.
Literally.
By the way, are you recording your audio?
Yes.
Good. You're very responsible.
I've been recording longer than you technically.
You're recording your audio because you're a very responsible, upstanding citizen, right? So let's set the stage for those listening and watching who don't know how you and I met. So a year and a half ago, I was asked to participate in the making of a documentary film called Stateless, which is still in the making, by filmmakers who were focusing on an anarchist community in Acapulco, Mexico, that formed around the Anarchapulco conference. And I happened to be invited also to the Anarchapulco conference to speak. And so I was supposed to be on this documentary as a talking head at that conference. But I was shown a trailer of the film, and it focused on three different people or sets of people in that community. And one of the sets of people was Lily and her husband, John. And I immediately focused on those two. And I thought that the film should be about them. And I was fascinated by their story. And I was dying to interview both of them and was planning on interviewing both of you when I came to Acapulco. And I guess it was a week before. Was it a week before or 2 weeks before in Acapulco when I got the news that John had been shot to death out there.
Yeah, it was February 1st.
So I guess it was 2 weeks before. Yeah, 2 weeks before the conference.
Pretty much. Yep.
When you and I were going to meet, And so you and I hadn't even conversed at that point. We had no conversations at all. I think we were sort of communicating through the filmmakers. But the plans were certainly there for me to interview you when I got there. And in the meantime, I had sort of really become and not just fascinated, but kind of entranced by both you and John and your story. And watching footage of both of you speaking, I was really impressed, and I couldn't wait to meet you. So then the news came that he had been shot to death at your house, and that Henza, who you just mentioned, Jason Henza, who was a friend of yours who was at the house at the time, was also shot. What was he shot? 6 times? Is that many?
He was 3 times. 3 times.
3 times, yeah. And you survived, of course, but you were in the house fearing for your life as the gunman came and went. So yeah, it was. And then I at that point, there were issues with the conference too that made me very, very nervous. I'm not even sure what we should or shouldn't say about it right now, but let's just say that there were issues with the Anarchapulco conference that I was going to, that you had been a part of, things I heard about what was going on there that made me not just concerned, but extremely paranoid, to the point where when I came to Acapulco, I didn't sleep for the entire 3 days I was there. When I interviewed you, I had not slept in, I think, a day and a half or something like that because of everything. But so you and I met in a downtown seedy, I'm going to say it, hotel in Acapulco, and met for the first time and conducted the interview. And it was a pretty amazing experience. I know for me, I think it was for you too. One of the most emotional and intense and dramatic episodes we've had, maybe the most. And I know a lot of fans consider it to be their favorite episode. So I want you to go back right now. So much has happened since then, and you and I have changed so much, especially you, but I think I have too. But I want you to go back in time right now and let's talk about who you were at that moment, and how you were feeling and what your life was like right then.
Well, that was like what I was dealing with that moment was I was dealing with the reality that like my life before that was not my own. You know, like I was making decisions, yes, but like I wasn't making decisions based off of what I wanted. I was making decisions based off of what other people wanted. First, my family. Then John came into my life, and I started making decisions based off of what he wanted. Just because I figured he had it more figured out than me, you know, like I was a very scared, very unaware person. Like I had lived most of my life in a bubble, somewhat manufactured by my family to try and essentially protect me from the crazy shit that was going on in my life and had been going on in my life before that. So they just kind of like manufactured reality, which it made me really angry for a long time at them. I didn't really understand why. One thing, the biggest difference I'd say between me and like now and when the murder happened was I had very little self-awareness of why I was the way I was. And when John died, I was still very much under the impression that like I had fucked up a lot of our relationship, me personally alone, you know, and I'd fucked up a lot of my life the way I saw it. So it was like, it was kind of hard to grapple with. I was dealing with very low self-esteem. Realistically, the only thing that kept me from totally losing my shit was people like you and the other people who kept talking to me every day like, you're going to be okay eventually, you know, because like I didn't believe it for months. It wasn't until I left Acapulco that I was like, all right, maybe I'll be okay eventually.
Right. Paloma Verde CBD has been the sponsor of Unregistered for about 3 months now. And I am so proud to say that dozens, actually I think scores or even, no, actually more than 100, because they're almost in every state now, unregistered listeners are now Paloma Verde customers. Paloma Verde, as I've said to you many times, is an independently owned store out of San Antonio, Texas, run by Vanessa and Carlos Abelar. Now, I think there are many reasons why Paloma Verde has become so popular among our listeners. The most obvious one is that they give us a huge deal that you're just not going to get from other CBD companies. 25% off all of their products. 25% off. You just use the discount code RENEGADE when you go to checkout, okay? On top of that, join their mailing list. You get another 10% off. That's 35% off your first order. And then they put together my 3 favorite Paloma Verde products into what they call the Unregistered Combo Pack, also known colloquially as the Thad Pack. I forgot English. You get gummies, which come in many fruit flavors. I eat way too many of them every week. In fact, I think I'm out of them right now. The soft gels, and depending on how much the lockdown and the political hysteria is getting me down, I use 2 to 3 to 4 of those a day. But my favorite thing, because it works so quickly, is their tincture. And in the combo pack, you get their high potency tincture. When I put a few drops under my tongue, I feel my anxiety melt away pretty quickly, and it also helps me sleep. So go to palomaverdestore.com, use the discount code RENEGADE, get the combo pack, change your life, make it better, and I thank you. Let's broaden the context and set the scene a little more for those people watching and listening who don't know the story. So why were you in Acapulco? What brought you there? What's the background?
Well, I'm an illegal immigrant. I still am, although I'm figuring out a solution to get that fixed. But yeah, we were arrested over cannabis crimes in Ohio, and rather than face them, it was in a corrupt area. So rather than face them, we came to Mexico, technically running from our problems, but trying to run to a new life instead of dealing with, the shit of the legal system. Mm-hmm. So we went to Acapulco partially because of Jeff Berwick and that community that was there. We didn't really know where else to go. We had no way of making money at the time. We had no money at the time. It was just about getting the fuck out of the United States, and we'll figure out the rest later. Acapulco was just supposed to be a landing zone until we figured out what we wanted to do. When we got there, we were like, we're just going to stay here and make it work. And we did for 3 years, until technically 4 years almost, until the shooting happened. And then it was just like, I stubbornly stayed in Acapulco for a couple months, as you recall. And then it was like a police encounter that I was just like, all right, fuck this. I'm done. I'm tired of all of this. Like, get me out of here. So I got the fuck out. And that's when the healing actually started to happen.
Right.
Also, when you got me that therapist.
When I got you the therapist?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the help of my old friends in the Bay Area who I grew up with who were therapists. Yeah, we did get you help. That was great. Got to revisit the shooting and tell the story again. And this is something that maybe, I don't know, it was a bit of a conflict between the two of us because we had different theories about what happened. And I mean, it was a bit arrogant.
I'm still theorizing.
Yeah, no, I know. Right. No one knows. So basically no one is sure of why John was killed or who was behind it, but there are several theories. And you and I have a different leading theory than you do, but I take yours very seriously. But you want to talk about what yours is?
Well, mine's kind of developed because, like, at first it was just like, oh, it was Paul. And like, yeah, I think
you got to explain who Paul was.
Paul was the crazy guy that was selling cocaine that lived with us that, like, threatened us for 6 months before the murder. And then, like, he took responsibility for it, and then he didn't, and then he killed himself. But long story short, like, I blamed it basically all on him and his antics, But, like, the more that I thought about it, like, Acapulco is a place where, like, if your business, like, your regular, let's say, like, I know of a specific example of a tortilla guy when we first moved to Acapulco. He got successful. Cartel came and said, give us your cut and give us the cut. He said, no. And they fucking killed him. A tortilla owner. And I've, like, since living where I live now, like, I've heard about the people that guard the butterflies. There are guys that go out there and risk their lives to keep the trees that the butterflies, like, land on every year from being cut down by these cartel loggers. There was a guy last year killed over it right after we went there,
God.
So, like, you have to be involved in illegal things, for one, to get the cartel's attention is a myth, in my opinion. For two, a lot of people were like, oh, the weed was fine, but they had to have been selling more. There's still people dying over weed in Mexico. It's not fine. So I kind of think, we were openly growing. Like, we had weed on the side of the hill. We did a big harvest the week before the murder. Anybody that's trimmed fresh weed knows it stinks. And we lived in an open air house in the top of this neighborhood.
Oh.
Probably already had people watching us.
Oh.
Like, I'm not convinced. Like, I think Paul, like, exaggerated it and was like, yeah, go for them, go for them. I think he did talk shit, but I don't think he was the only thing, I think not only that, but like John was extremely cocky, and
yes,
that can get you killed in a city like Acapulco.
Well, let's talk about how cocky he was. So I mean, there are many incidents I know about, but I guess the one that I think is really the prime evidence for my theory is that, correct me on the chronology because it's been a while since I did this, but I did the research. So he got into a major fight with some people who lived in your neighborhood and ended up crashing his truck into their car.
Well, they crashed into him. That was one of those things that they weren't from our neighborhood. That was the problem, was like, they stole a taxi. They were just random young kids on drugs. They stole a taxi that they couldn't even drive correctly. Like, they couldn't shift. You could tell with the way they drove. And they painted it, and they did drugs in the street for like 2 days, and then they started terrorizing the neighbors. And John was like, hey, do you know these people? And they're like, no. So he chased them out. And then most people don't know this, but he had a connected friend of his call the police, essentially, when he saw them in the neighborhood again, and they were arrested.
Right.
But as a poor person in Mexico, you don't get out of jail. Not anytime soon. You stay years in jail. It's not like the United States. Like, once you get put in jail as a poor person, you're stuck.
Right. So I did the research, and I found that there were these people arrested in your neighborhood in fact, I think on your street, just down the road, about a block or two, whatever. And I assumed that was because of John. John had something to do with it. So I assumed that, and these were drug dealers who also were arrested with guns.
I mean, they weren't even drug dealers. Like, when I say they were on drugs, they weren't even on like real drugs. They were on like some like plumbing thinner thing. It's like a cleaning product or something like that.
Oh.
And they huff it, and it's like the poor man's drug. You buy it for like 4 pesos or something at the cleaning chemical store.
Okay.
So like,
yeah, right.
They also didn't have the money to steal their own cars. So like, the guys that had those guns the day of the murder, they were the same guns that the police in the United States carry around, the handguns. They were nice guns, because that was the thing I fixated on, was the gun. And I was like, damn, how the hell did these idiots end up with this? Like,
oh,
you had, like, guns are expensive and hard to come by in Mexico. Like, the cartels have them, but like little guys terrorize, stealing taxis and shit, do not. They
right.
didn't have them. Like, they would have used it,
Right. So we have a few theories here. So there's this guy named Paul Propert, who was a member of the anarchist community in Acapulco, who lived with you guys shortly before the shooting, who had a huge falling out with both of you, but especially John. And I have seen the posts in social media, so you are not exaggerating. I mean, he had very, very serious mental illness. I don't know exactly what it was, but he ended up threatening me, sending me pictures after you were on my podcast.
I remember that picture. I know exactly what photo you're talking about.
Very, very disturbed guy. Very, very disturbed guy. I think he was wearing a gas mask and was naked in the picture. I mean, we laughed at it then. And, we were not fans of his because he was threatening you and had been, and might have even been responsible for the murder. But he ended up, as you said, killing himself last summer, about a year ago, right? And he had been in Iraq.
Right as I started my new relationship.
He had been in Iraq. He was an Iraq War veteran, and claimed that was part of why he was mentally damaged. But so he definitely made threats against both of you before, during, and after the murder of John. So that's, that was clearly, there was many reasons to suspect he had something to do with it. then there were these people, I guess, down the road who got arrested for whatever, and whether or not John might have been connected to that. They're another suspect in this. It could have been some collaboration, or it could have been, I've never heard you give this theory that you guys were growing enough weed that you could have gotten in trouble with the cartel as well.
Well, yeah, we were growing weed, we were selling oil, we had the gringo market basically cornered at Anarchapulco. For all we know, like, for all I know, it was a warning to the rest of Anarchapulco, like, look, stop it, leave the drugs to us, all of them, because there was nobody to provide that stuff afterwards.
Right. So no one knows, but there are many reasons, and John's personality must have had something to do with it, don't you think? Whatever it was.
He was difficult, he was cocky, he was pushy, yeah.
Right.
He pissed a lot of cops off, like, who knows what it could have been. Like, we had a lot of the police force that really didn't like us.
Yeah. So when I met you, this was in February, I'll never forget when I first saw you. I walked into the hotel room where we were meeting, and actually this is the first time we met, this night before the interview, and you had this huge mane, sun bleached blonde dreadlocks that were like as big as you were, because you're very thin and small, and it was pretty, like, I mean, you certainly stood out. I mean, even in America you would have stood out, but especially in Mexico. And now look at you. Now you have your hair is straight, it's red back to its.
I still stand out, but like, people are more friendly to me now, so like,
yeah,
they're first shy and respectful, but I get more smiles. Like, old ladies are way nicer to me now, and I like that because I identify with old ladies in a lot of ways. So
why, you've told me why, but can you say why you think you had dreadlocks, or what was appealing about the dreadlocks? What was important to you about them?
It was a symbol of resistance. Like, I got them for a similar reason that John did. It was my fuck you to the state for, like, essentially trying to control me. It was also a way of having control over my body, because I had tried to dread my hair as a kid, and my mom, who was evidently wiser than me, kept brushing my hair out, and I felt like it was a big affront to my identity. So when I was assuming my identity, I was like, I'm gonna get dreads, and I grew out my dreads, or my hair for dreads, until I got into Mexico. And then when I was in Mexico, I finally did it, but like, I regretted it in terms of like sensory wise almost immediately, and it took me years to admit it, because it was nightmare. It was like sleeping on ropes and rough textured and heavy and
but you also told me there was another reason you wore dreads, was that it served as a filter, a social filter.
It was a filter. It kept people away from me that would judge me based on my hair. But like, I also realized it like, a lot of people that would judge you based on your hair aren't necessarily bad people that you need to get away from you, I've realized. Because I, like, after I got rid of the dreads, a lot of people are like, well, I didn't realize I had a prejudice against, dreadlocks. And it's like, I mean, they are dirty as fuck, at least. I don't know anybody who doesn't have dirty dreads, like.
Yeah, you were telling me it took you how long to comb it out? It took you...
Two fucking months of my life, daily, just like very slowly, and the amount of grime, dog hair, and dabs that was contained in my hair was unreal. It's to the point where even now, like, my hair is very long and I have a lot of it, but there's no weight. Like, it feels like it's not there other than when it's brushing against me.
Wow, you just blew open what many of us always assumed about Rastas, and white Rastas in particular. Right?
I mean, like, I still, like, I have friends that have dreads and they're beautiful.
Yeah.
But like, when I see them complain about their dreads, I'm just like, that's why I got rid of them. Like, I was like, the final straw was when I moved to the small town that I live in. And within a week, I was just walking my puppy, and some guy was like, hey, you smoke weed? I'll sell you some weed. I'll sell you some weed. And I was just not cool with that, because everything that I had been through, like, even in Acapulco, most people don't realize this, but we didn't buy weed directly, ever, from a dealer, ever. Like, I never interacted with a Mexican drug dealer. I still technically haven't. Like, because I won't go. I have too much anxiety about it. I don't want them to see my white my white face, basically.
Please
You
don't.
know, when I get exactly when I get weed, I go 2.5 hours away from where I live and have my friend get it for me and have it there waiting for me, so I never have to see anybody.
Yeah.
Fuck that.
So let's
But I was
see.
just like, I'm tired of being associated with it. I'd rather
Okay.
be more anonymous,
Yeah.
blend in.
Yeah. I mean, you were also, I mean, the social filtering was, you know, the filter of the dreads was a pretty big filter. It kept out a lot of people. And right, you weren't reclusive, and you certainly weren't antisocial
It
because,
made a lot of people not take me seriously.
right. But I'm just saying it was also, I think you were hiding in some ways, weren't you?
Oh, I definitely was.
Okay.
I'm like, I was also more nervous when traveling because, like, now I get nervous when I travel, but it's not the same. It's like, I know that even if immigration were to stop me, they probably won't ask me for ID because they're going to look at my innocent face and they're going to go, she wouldn't be here illegal, you know? So they're not even, but like when I traveled before, it was like, oh shit, they're gonna look at me, look at my dreadlocks, and ask me for identification. And I like, that's the biggest fear still, you know, is being asked for identification.
Right.
Whereas no, I just look innocent.
Yeah, I was going to say, you also, I mean, your look back then, you were intimidating. You were intimidating looking, and now you're not at all.
Exactly. And I like it because like before, like kids would look at me like with like a fearful, interested look, and now like I get smiles, you know. Everybody just kind of treats me better. I'd say I get better prices because I come across as like warmer that way. Because I came across as a very cold person with the dreadlocks, like
Yeah,
very tough,
you did.
very rugged, and
Yes.
like I can be a cold person in some ways emotionally, but like, I mean, I'm a lot friendlier than most people I think realize.
Yeah, no, well, right. I realized that right away. So let's go back to the time again. So John's murdered. I come to Acapulco. I interview you, and then I fly back. And I think we started talking on the phone right away, right? Pretty much like the next.
Yeah, we were because like I was trying to figure out what the hell to do with myself. I think you were encouraging me both to write a book and to get a therapist, but you were like, basically any time that I like started to really freak out, I would message you, you would schedule a call with me, and then I basically would feel better until the call, and then we'd find some way to make some sort of little progress for me, like,
Well,
because I was like, I was just so low on hope in those days.
yeah.
So
Well, your life was terrible right then. So let's explain how bad it was. So right after that, you were in hiding from the Mexican police because you were afraid of being deported. You were afraid because they
yeah,
weren't
and from Paul, because Paul was still
right.
threatening us on a daily basis. So I was like, all right.
That's
So
right.
Hans and I went hiding to a beach townhouse with a pool, like right on the beach. And the pool ended up being a nightmare, and there was no internet, but it was nice other than that. Like, Hans is a great roommate, and he was super huge to have around. But then I like got this like insatiable desire to be alone. So I found this like shitty hole in the wall apartment that was essentially the concrete cube that I called you from a few times freaking out.
Yeah.
That was in the hood, and it was just like, all right, well, that didn't go well. So I found another place. Yeah, the day I moved in there, that was when the police brawl that happened when I was texting you, because that was the first time we had texted on WhatsApp, and I was
Yeah.
I was going to meet Doug for Temazcal.
Let's stop there. So this was like what I'd known you for a few days at this point. You're in hiding. You're living. You're terrified of being killed by somebody or getting deported by the police. And you decide to go. You went to. So I get a text from you. I remember this, and I didn't really know you yet. I knew that you were like
We were just chatting. You were like, "Hey,
right,
text me." And I'm like, I don't remember. I think I was telling you that I was going with my friend because I was in a real good mood when all that happened. I remember I had just eaten a steak.
right.
I was really stoned, and I was texting you, walking to meet what's essentially one of my best friends.
Right.
So I was like, all right, this is great.
So at
And you
that
were
point,
just
yeah. So hang on. So at that point, so here's what I knew about you, right? Like, I knew you came from. Your mother was a major drug dealer in Northeast Ohio, who was killed in a horrible way, and you had guns held to your head by cops as a kid and lived in just you know, among criminals basically as a child. And then you hooked up with John when you were, you know, a teenager, and became criminals as major weed dealers. And then you were on the run, so you're even more major criminals on the run. And then you were went across the border to Mexico, yet another crime. So now you're like triple criminal, and you have these
I'm
crazy
just principled.
you have these crazy dreadlocks, and you're intimidating as shit, and you've been living on a hill for years with this guy who has just been murdered in Acapulco, which is like had the 5th highest murder rate in the world at that point. So, and then you're texting me and saying, I just went to Walmart, or is it Walmart? It was Walmart.
Well, what was happening is I was meeting my friend Doug, because Doug was like, Lily, I'll pay for Temazcal. And for people that don't know what that is, Temazcal is just like Mexican sweat lodge ceremony. So they put you in this hot little hut that they dig into the ground and make you sit there for hours. And it's spiritual and you're reborn, I guess. It was really hard, but I was excited for it. I'd always wanted to try it. So I was like, I think I was telling you, like, hey, I'm going to Temazcal. It should be interesting. You know, I'll let you know what it's like. It's supposed to be therapeutic. And you were like, great. And then, like, as that was happening, these cops came up and they're like, hola, hola, senorita. And I just ignored them and I kept walking. And I walked around the corner going to where I was supposed to meet my friend, and I see them like pull down the road, and they drive all the way down the road and they stop. And then like 2 of the cops get out of the truck and they start running on foot towards me. And I turn around and I fucking book it. And I'm running uphill on a road that has like fenced in on both sides. So I had nowhere to go, but I was just running because I didn't know what else to do. I left my shoes behind. And I just took off running until the cops turned around with the truck, came, cut me off again, and they tackled me, basically, and just held me. And I started fighting them and biting them, kicking them and screaming. Like, it was a meltdown. Like, looking back, it was an autistic meltdown. I was crying. I was screaming rape. I was screaming at passersby, saying the cops are killing me. Like, and the passersby were like talking to the cops, like, what the fuck's going on here? And the cops were like, just move along. And they're like, I don't know. This is a white lady. It's just like, leave her alone. She looks upset. Like, and then finally tourist police shows up. And tourist police at least speak some English. So they get some dialogue going. And they're basically like, we know who you are. Come in for a statement. We want your official statement as a witness to the murder. And I'm like, just let me go to Temazcal, leave me alone. And they wouldn't. It was like minutes arguing. And then finally I was like, look, you guys stole my dogs, you stole everything I own out of my house, and you're going to give none of it back? We're even, leave me be. And they just kind of like, she translated that to them, and they just kind of like looked at each other, and they looked back at me, and they just like waved me off, and they let go of me immediately. And like, I think they might have shaken my hand. At least, like, they let me go. That was it. And I was walking away. And I had messaged you saying I was being apprehended by the cops. I called my lawyer. I also messaged Doug. And so Doug was coming, and he was driving down the street. He sees, like, the road is filled with, like, federal police. Because, like, 1 truck showed up, and then, like, 4 or 5 trucks showed up in support. So there were probably 30 officers by the end of it.
Correction.
And they just couldn't.
Correction. You did not tell me you were being apprehended. You told me that you were fighting the police in the streets. And you know what I thought about you at that moment? I thought, this crazy bitch. What did I get myself into with this crazy bitch? She's fighting the cops in the street when she's on the run, wanted in 2 different countries, maybe. And
it was just a gut instinct. I couldn't help it. Like, I was not going to be taken. I wasn't going to let it happen. And
I think I was on the phone with Doug at that time, either right before or right after, and we were both like, holy shit. Like, we were both so terrified. I remember for a couple
because he pulled up and he said he expected to see me still in the arms of police, but he said he saw a sea of police behind me and me walking by myself with no shoes towards his car.
Because I'm thinking, in the United States, if you do anything like that at all, you are dead or in prison, like, instantly. They don't mess around here.
Well, to be clear, like, this experience happened after a buildup of 3 years of police encounters in Mexico, all over Mexico, none of which had even ended in them pulling their guns up against me, you know?
Okay.
The one thing I will say about all those dudes was, like, they were all strapped. They all had their guns, and their guns all had bullets in it. But they were just, like, hanging. And they were just, like, they never hit me or even held me that tightly, which was part of the problem, because they would underestimate me, and I'd, like, launch into, like, a random direction and take off running, and they tackle me again. That happened a few times. They were like, we just want to ask you questions. And I'm like, I'm traumatized. Leave me be.
Yeah. Well,
it worked. So
I know. Well, that's the thing. So I was like, you crazy bitch, you're gonna get killed. I need to, like, distance myself from this person. But then you were like, no, it's gonna be fine. I've had this experience before, and then it turned out to be true. It actually worked out exactly right, and probably it was the right thing to do. It was probably the right thing to do. Yeah, amazingly.
It was. They would have just taken me to. I would have had to. The only good thing that could have come out of that is they would have got me to the police station. They would have realized I was illegal. They would have gone to deport me. They wouldn't have been able to deport me because I would have applied for asylum, and maybe I'd already be, you know, a resident.
Right.
So, like, that is one thing that, like, I didn't realize it at the time, though. I didn't know any of this at the time. So I just assumed if they got me, I was fucked. That was it. Because the only thing worse than being on the run and scared for your life is in jail.
Yeah. Right. So let's talk about your major transformations since then. So it's been a year and a half, basically. Yeah, it's been a year and a half exactly, in fact. So let's start with the biggest transformation, I think, or at least this is where it started. Your beliefs, your attitudes about John. So talk about how you.
Yeah, that was something. Yeah, I know what you're getting at.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
That was something I started to unpack being friends with you, actually, because you actually started to, like, poke some holes in things. Because I was very much like, John is amazing and he did deserve that, blah 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 blah. Like, he had his flaws and, like, he had a good mind, but when it came to doing things, he didn't really do much. And there were a lot of, like, things about that situation with him that were, like, pretty wrong the whole time. And it took me being out of that situation to understand what was truly wrong with that situation. Because until he died, like I mentioned previously, I was convinced I was broken. I was like, there's something wrong with me. I'm pretty sure I had already self-diagnosed as autistic, but it was like, I took it as like I'm diseased, I'm broken, here's what's wrong with me disorder type of thing. It was, and I look at it very differently now. But I was very much in the mindset that, yeah, I was the one to blame for the reason that relationship went the way it did, for the reason that, like, because I was blaming myself for his death a lot, you know? Part of me was that relationship was toxic before we ever got to Mexico, you know? Mm-hmm. He'd probably still be alive, maybe. I've had some people who are very close to him and knew him well that theorize maybe something else would have done it, you know? Because he was extremely hard to deal with. And it was just downright toxic and abusive. And the one thing that I will admit that it took me a long time to admit because I felt guilty was after he died, and a couple of my closest friends thought this too, one of the first thoughts that crossed my mind after, like, holy shit, that just happened was, I'm free. Because while I had to deal with everything that I was going through with the murder, the one thing that I didn't have to deal with, which was maybe the most important of them all, was I didn't have to deal with his fucking reaction to it, you know? He was awful with that stuff. He would have made it so much worse. I only had to deal with my reaction to it and Hensel's reaction to it, which was like some sort of weird zen, you know? So it was like, it sucked, but it was also like, it was a freeing moment in that regard. And I've had, you know, several people reach out and say, like, I feel guilty for saying this, but I have to, you know, it's good to see that you're free. And it's like, well,
yeah,
it's sad that that's what it took for me to start to see my self-worth, because that's the reality of it. I had no self-worth before that.
Right. Yeah. So I gave a speech at Anarchapulco, which ended up being just about you two, really. I gave sort of a historical background to agorism, which is what you guys were practicing, you know, black market operations. And I portrayed both of you, and I felt this way deeply as heroes. And I saw John as a martyr. And he still is, you know, I mean, he wouldn't have been on the run. A lot of what happened to him in his life, he was in prison in Oklahoma when he was, what, 19 years old for weed?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of what happened to him in his life was because of his impulsive behaviors. He would make snap decisions, and then he would literally stick to them to the death. And, you know, like Acapulco being one of them. Like
Right.
we could have left Acapulco and that would not have happened, you know, because we would have been in a new city and nobody would have known us. But we were stubbornly having to stay in Acapulco, you know, like.
Right.
He makes impulsive decisions and stuck to them.
So for me, right. So, I mean, you know, because I didn't know about him enough at that point, I, of course, I was interested in the politics of it. And of course, you know, it was unjust why you two were on the run. You should never have been charged with anything. I mean, this was over cannabis. But I think he is probably the kind of person who, it doesn't matter what the law is, that he's probably going to find some trouble for himself. Does that make sense?
Well, exactly. He was a magnet for it. And I've said this many times. I think I even said it in the last interview. Like, that day that I got arrested, if it would have just been me, my puppy, at that abandoned house with a car full of shit, they'd have never searched me. They would have been like, oh, here's a ticket for trespassing. Move the fuck on. But because it was him, and it was the way that he filmed the whole encounter, how he was cocky, how he was very much like, I won't consent to a search, you know, like, it was.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He was very confrontational. And then, like, he gets in there and they try to take a DNA sample and he's like, you're going to have to make me. And he had to judge, like, basically he made that point where he was like, are you gonna force me at the point of a gun to take my DNA from me? And they're like, yes. And he's like, I just wanted to hear you say that. And he gave it to him voluntarily. You know, he was like that. And that was a big difference between him and I. It's like, I admired that part about him, but, like, I'm not like that.
Yeah.
I'm more likely to just, like, not deal with the situation than to actively buck against it, you know, in that way.
John's life is an object lesson for libertarians, because he lived, I think, as a pure libertarian, and he was a hardcore libertarian. When you met, he was wearing a Ron Paul hat. I know this. And he was an ANCAP, an anarcho-capitalist libertarian. Right. I didn't even know this part about when you got arrested in Cleveland, which sort of started this all. But yes, he did everything possible to make a political point, whenever possible to make a political point, and would never back down from authority, even if it was local thugs trying to impose their authority on that hillside.
Yeah, I mean, like, the fact that we were growing weed in Mexico is openly, because, like, you can grow weed and nobody know, you know, that's possible. And maybe eventually I'll do that again someday. But, like, he was growing very openly on our hillside, you know, and it was like, it was his way of protesting, like, Ohio, you know, like, oh, I'm gonna do what I fucking want. But, like, I think it contributed, you know. I think it was definitely a part.
So if you follow the pure libertarian philosophy to its very end, you might very well get shot. Right?
No, it's actually or shot or permanently incarcerated. Like,
right.
Honestly, that's the thing. Like, with agorism, with any of it, like, when you get into these things, you gotta, like, take the time to really figure out how much risk you're willing to take on yourself. You know, he was always saying, like, you gotta know what's worth living for and what's worth dying for. And, like, at this point, like, I've thought about that a lot, and I'm not willing to die for as much as he was. I'm willing to die for actually very little, you know. But that's fine because, like,
that's what I saw in you. Yeah, that's what I saw in you. You were very different in that way. But can I tell you sort of why I started to wonder? It was like, to me, it was solving not just a murder mystery, which I was also engaged in, but solving the mystery of your relationship. So, do you remember? It's been a while since we went through this, but the thing that made me wonder about your depiction of the relationship and how wonderful he was, was that you talked about, well, I knew that at that house where you lived on top of that hill in Acapulco for years, that there was a restaurant that you ran out of that house, that there was a
Yep.
permaculture farm that you ran out of that house, that you
Mm-hmm.
ran at that house. And you
Anarchapulco came out of that house. Like
your own you organized your own conference, which was a rival conference to Anarchapulco. You were blogging on a regular basis for money on
every day. It was every single day for 2 years straight.
right, on what's the platform again?
Steam it.
On
Steam it.
Steemit?
Now Steam it's Hive for people that are like still involved. They all moved to the Hive blockchain, which is better.
Right.
But
And you were blowing glass.
yeah.
And you were
I was brewing kombucha. I had like so many side hustles. I can't even keep them all straight at this point.
right. So and there was weed being grown. Okay, so then I find out. So I'm thinking, wow, these guys are incredible. Lily and John are amazing. Look at what they're doing with like zero resources, living in poverty, but producing all this stuff, all this activity on this hill in Acapulco. And then I started saying, so let's see, Lily, you do the blog, and you do the glass blowing, and you do the farming, and you do the cooking at the restaurant, and John grows the weed. And I
And
thought,
then John would pay me in dabs to do the work of growing the weed for him while he laid in bed like,
and then you would talk about like how he was taking a lot of photographs, and I looked at the photographs, and every single photograph of his was of the sunset from your house, so he didn't even leave the house to take the photographs. So the guy was very clearly depressed, I think, right? And just not doing much at all for whatever reason, though.
he
Right?
had been that way since like I met him,
Mm.
And I think it was like, he said it was rooted in going to prison, but like, I don't know, talking to his mom, knowing what kind of childhood he had, like, he was always kind of, hard to motivate. And the entire time that I knew him, like, most people don't realize this, but like, yeah, we grew weed in Ohio, but we grew weed kind of unsuccessfully. We didn't really make very much money at it. We were struggling most of the time. We were terrified for our freedom most of the time. Like, the most successful grows we had was there at the end, and that was finally when I knew enough to start actually helping. And he, and we had enough resources to where he could, he had a funny way of paying me with the money that I worked for, in the form of dabs, basically. Like, I had to ask for my dabs and all of that. Like, everything was rationed. I had no control over the money or any of it, but I had to do all the work.
I didn't even.
And if I didn't do all the work, then it was. Yeah. These are all things that I've been unpacking and trying to, like, because I got a little bit too much in the, you don't want to speak ill of the dead thing. But like, he was an asshole, and it's really not any other way to say that.
I mean, he was also 27, right, when he died?
Yeah, but that's not any excuse, because my boyfriend is the same age, and he is the most gentle person I have ever met. You want to know what the big difference is? Childhood.
I know. So tell us about John's childhood, which, I mean, both of you have spectacularly terrible childhoods. His was pretty terrible in one particular way, right? About his father.
Yeah, his father had struggled with bipolar issues and suicidal issues for years, from my understanding, before he was even born. And then within the first year of him being born, his mom left his father and was like, you need to get a fucking job and get your life together. I'm done with you. And it was this whole thing, supposedly, where they had one big fight, and he started to threaten to kill himself. The cops showed up. From my understanding, the cops essentially caused his eventual suicide, because he had threatened suicide like that repeatedly before, but like, clearly lived to see other days. It wasn't until, I guess, the cops like rushed into this room, and he was standing on the other side of it, and got shot, and he died 3 days before John's first birthday. And then you combine that with a shitty stepdad to essentially replace his father that his mom went for 2 years later. And that guy molded him into the asshole that he was. You know, before that, he was just difficult. Then that was where he got his spite and his meanness.
Right. Yeah. So you guys get busted in Cleveland. Yeah. You have a grow house you're living in one of the worst neighborhoods in Cleveland near railroad tracks, I think, right?
That wasn't what happened. What actually happened was we were in the same county where we went to college. Actually, we were just picking up shit. We filled our car with stuff. We had a puppy at the time, and we were taking stuff because he worked in Cleveland as a stagehand. So we would build stages at I forget the name of the place, but there's like this white tenty venue that's really well known in Cleveland that I'm fucking blanking on because it's been 5 years since I've been there. But that's where he worked. He'd build the stages for like Skrillex and shit. Oh. So after that, we were like, okay, we're going to go to his aunt's, who we stayed with for like 6 months. We filled up our car with shit that we had left there, including old weed that had no THC content in it because we had blown it, and a case of butane we forgot, I guess. And we go to leave, and we go back to Detroit. This is when we were moving to Detroit. And it was shitty because like we stopped in an abandoned house, partially because we were living in abandoned houses in Detroit, and we couldn't. It was basically, we were at a point in our lives where anything abandoned, we were going inside of it. And that's what happened. And the cops showed up. And so like, yeah, that was all in the same county that I went to college. That's important because there was an undercover in my political groups. Yeah. And he was the one that eventually charged me with 5 felonies. He said, I don't know what I'm charging you with, but it will stick. And he was right. It stuck.
Yeah, didn't we figure out who that cop was, or no, or?
I think so, but I need to figure it out again because that's part of building my case for this asylum thing. I need to prove the fact that like he knew who I was because that's a big part of it.
The great irony is that, well, I don't know, he's black. He's a black cop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Black undercover cop who busted 2 white.
He used to come to. He used to come to my Students for Sensible Drug Policy meetings when I was president of that club, and he would come there and he'd be like, oh yeah, I'm from Akron, I'm trying to get a SSDP set up there, but I'm having a hard time. And I never trusted him because he kept coming back with the same excuse.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Akron, that place loves drugs. He would have no problem setting that thing up at Akron University. So I was like, seems fishy. So I told everybody in the club, like, don't trust this guy. Don't talk about your drug use around this guy. But I think they still did because a lot of them got busted that year for using drugs at various points on campus. But I didn't. But it was like one of those things where that day he was like, when he saw me, he goes, oh, look who we got here. And I was just like, fuck.
Nice guy.
So,
yeah. Nice guy.
Real nice guy.
And all you guys ever did, right, was grow and distribute weed.
Technically, all we did was have some shit in our car that day.
Right. I mean, but you were weed dealers, but that was it, right?
Yeah, like we were harmless, and
right.
we were actually living in Michigan, and we were about to go through the legal process to become legal there. So like we were trying to go legit. We just got fucked on the way to going legit.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you get busted. He had already done prison time, right? When he was 19 in Oklahoma for weed. Is that right?
Yeah, but he was never convicted. That was what was crazy about.
Oh.
Like his story is pretty crazy. Like part of why he got what he did was because of how confrontational he is. Mm-hmm. But his story is an excellent display of the injustices of the system. Because like he was never convicted of a crime, yet he spent, I think, like 5 months or something in prison, like a real prison.
I know.
Not convicted. He was dismissed with cost. Like it was just like one of his situation's a big part of what got me to buck the system because I was like, fuck, there is no hope,
Yeah, when I remember coming across his mugshot. You can find his mugshot online. When he was in prison, he was 19 and he had the shaved head, and it was
that was the last time his hair was cut before his dreadlocks.
I know, and I had only seen pictures and video of him with dreadlocks, and that was before I knew much about him. And I think I cried when I saw that picture. It was because he was 19, he was a kid, and to
And he
see.
looks so angry in that photo. You can just see it boiling out of him. Like I've looked at that photo since the murder too, and it's just like you can just see it bubbling out of him, like
Yeah,
motherfuckers, you know?
right. Defiance and anger in his face, but it really, someone that young to be going through that, you know, even though I think he in many ways wanted it. I think, don't you think? In some ways, he wanted to be a martyr.
In some ways, you know, that was what he was talking about. A lot of, like, I'm not sure, like, he would talk about growing older, but in some regard, like, I'm not sure he really expected to, you know?
Yeah.
Because he knew that his behavior was risky. We discussed it, like, a lot. You know, it was one of the things he apologized to me for before he died was, like, he realized that the reason that I had lived in such a state of fear for my life over the 6 months before the murder was because he couldn't keep his fucking mouth shut, you
Oh,
know?
right.
So, like, that was what inflamed Paul in the first place. The falling out was because John was very much the type of man who would call people out on the things that he was guilty of. And, like, he was charismatic enough to fool people into thinking that he was doing better than he did. And that was partially because of me, because I was behind the scenes making everything happen and making it look really good, you know? But, like, with Paul, I think on some level, Paul saw through it. And Paul was, you know, like, the other people, because, like, pretty much everybody that we got close to in my entire relationship with John, friendship-wise, blew up in our faces in some spectacular manner. Usually because of how he was handling it. And it was like, there was a lot of, it's like a trend in the liberty community right now for, like, anarchist women to be like, my ex was a narcissist, but, like, I've done a lot of research. He had a lot of very narcissistic tendencies. That was, you know, that was why all of that happened. And when you read Paul's posts, like, it's evident it was John's cocky attitude and how John couldn't shut up and how John couldn't even take his own fucking advice, like. And and the thing is, what made people take Paul seriously was the fact that a lot of people had bad experiences with John, you know?
Right. Now, you know, he was also very charismatic and very, very intelligent. I mean, I've watched hours of footage of him being interviewed. I've watched footage of him just sort of hanging out in parties and talking to people. And I found him to be, as I said, charismatic and a very smart guy just from watching that. But there's a whole other story behind the scenes that I've learned from you. And it's remarkable how much
Well,
how much your mind has changed about him just in a year and a half.
yeah, it's like, it took me a long time for me to be, like, okay with feeling negative feelings towards him. Because, like,
Yeah, sure.
that whole, like, I just put a lot of blame on myself. Like, why didn't I leave? Why didn't I leave? Well, like, at this point, I understand why I didn't leave. You know, I didn't really see that I had an option. I had zero self-worth, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And this was all reinforced by, like, a lot of what he would say about me, because he was very mean. He was very mean to me. And he would, like, when he'd get frustrated at me, a lot of times he'd say things like, are you fucking retarded? Just like that. Are you fucking retarded? No, I'm serious. And this is a serious question. Are you actually retarded? He would ask just in that tone. But no, you know, that's the thing with these narcissistic personalities is when you first meet them, when you see them in public, they're smiley, they're charismatic, they're friendly as fuck. But then you get them close and you kind of start to see the cracks and the inconsistencies in their logic and all sorts of things, you know. Also the fact that he alienated me from everybody in my life. I didn't realize that until I started to reconnect with people, and I'm just, at this point, I'm like, why did I cut these people off?
Right. Yeah, you and I spent many, many months, probably the better part of a year, basically unpacking who John Galt was, right?
Yeah, who he was really not like what I wanted him to be. Because that's what it was I didn't want to admit that I just spent pretty much 8 years of my life in a terrible relationship with somebody that didn't even like me and that seemed to hate me because of fundamentally who I am. Because the issues that he all had with me all stem to my autistic tendencies. That's the biggest thing that's been the self-discovery. Like, I've mentioned a little bit to you personally looking into the autism stuff, but the last 6 months I've just been looking into it. And there's like every day I read like somebody talking about their experiences, an autistic person, and then I read it and it's like my mind will jump into oh, that's why he was mad at me for that, or oh, that's why I kept making worse and worse mistakes as things got more and more stressful, and all these things snowballed together. And it's just like, shit, if I'd have known that he just hated me because I was autistic, something that I can't change about me, I would have left long before I ever had to have the near-death experience of almost being killed. Like, shit.
Yeah, so you recently told me for the first time, I think, that you consider yourself to be autistic. And I was kind of challenging you a bit, because I'm always skeptical. I don't like the way that's thrown around as an epithet. I hate it. I sort of, even though I'm guilty, I've done it before, people are on the spectrum using that terminology. So-and-so is autistic. I mean, it gets thrown around a lot. In many cases, it's apt, and in many cases, it's not. And often, though, I just find it to be sort of arbitrary, and I don't really know what people mean, because people who are described as being on the spectrum, to me, have been like a very wide range of personalities, actually. I see some things in you, I suppose, could be classified by psychologists as being on the spectrum, but how do you see it, and why do you think that you are autistic, Lily?
It's been something, because I was really skeptical to start too. Like I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned, I might have said this just before we started recording, but my brother is diagnosed autistic.
Right.
And I was skeptical of it then, because I didn't understand him, but I also didn't understand autism. So it was like, okay. But the thing was, I also always felt a weird kinship with that brother. The thing was, like, it's worth just describing honestly how I came to the fact that I'm autistic, which is kind of a sad story, but like I haven't really had much doubt in my mind, although my view as to what autism means for me has changed quite a bit. So like what happened was, in the worst of my relationship with John, when I would get into fights with him, I'd essentially have what are called meltdowns. And these are like, you go into essentially an animalistic breaking down emotionally state. Sometimes you're breaking things, sometimes you're hurting yourself, screaming, you don't feel in control of yourself. Like I would rage around like I was going crazy and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was also self-harming. Most people don't know this, but I used to hit myself in the head a lot. I'd hit myself till I made myself dizzy and sick.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But I couldn't control it in the moment. And like after those episodes would happen, I'd be left literally cold, shaking, and scared. Like, what's going on with me? And John would use those episodes, he'd witness them, and he'd use them against me like, look, you're fucking crazy. Clearly, you're not okay. There's something wrong with you. Something neurologically wrong with you. And finally, after like a couple years of him telling me that, I was just like, I Googled it. Why do I keep hitting myself? The only thing I could find was autism. So I Googled symptoms of autism. And then I looked at the symptoms and I was just like, oh, so I'm autistic. Because there wasn't a single symptom that didn't apply, And I've been doing research into mental health my entire life. My mom was diagnosed schizophrenic, which I actually think that she was misdiagnosed and was actually autistic, most likely, But I looked into all these things because I was afraid of going crazy like my mom did. So I looked into bipolar, looked into OCD, I looked into schizophrenia, I looked into everything. And the only thing that ever like resonated with me other than PTSD was autism and ADHD. I also deal with like a lot of that stuff. But like the combination of those two things was like, for the first time in my life, I went from feeling like totally alone and broken to, holy shit, some total random stranger just described me on a piece of paper. And I was like, all right. But like the way that I didn't join any like support groups or anything. I didn't reach out to the autistic community. I was just like, oh no, I'm autistic. And I told John, and John was like, oh, I explained why you're so ridiculous. And we never talked about it again. And then like, probably 6 months after the murder, I was on Facebook, and Facebook just recommended to me autism late diagnosis support group. And I was like, so I joined it and I started reading the posts. And by the end of the day, I was in tears. Like, I didn't realize that this was this much of me. You know, like most people don't know, I sucked my thumb compulsively from the time I was in the womb until I was 9 years old. It was a stim. Most people don't know that. Like, the thing is, like, the reason why most people don't see me as autistic and don't see women as autistic and why we don't get diagnosed is because we're really good at faking it. So, like, we put on a mask to try to act what most people would expect, you know, and then, like, when we're by ourselves, we tear off the mask and we're exhausted and emotional and irritable and stuff like that. So it's like, I spent my whole life trying to pretend that I was, you know, normal, basically. And then I realized that I'm not and that I don't have to be. And that's when everything really started to open up for me.
Wow. And this is all fairly recent.
This is all within the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Partially because, like, when I started dating my boyfriend, I brought up the autism thing to him. He was the first person I had talked to. Actually, first person I talked to other than John was Hensa. And I'll always love Hensa for this because it was like 3 days after the murder. And I was like sitting there like having a panic attack. And I like look at Hensa and I'm like, Hensa, I have to tell you something. He goes, what? I'm like, I'm autistic. And he goes, I know. And I was like, oh, okay.
I remember.
He's like, I'm fully aware.
God.
And I was like, oh, okay. All right. You know. And then, like, after that, when I started dating my boyfriend, I was like, yeah, I think, because he brought up the fact that I get, like, and people that spend a lot of time around me, like, notices. I can get, like, kind of a cold, empty look to my face sometimes when, like, I withdraw into my head. And it'll make it seem like I'm totally uninterested in the people around me and, like, in a bad mood and stuff. But I'm really just, like, focused on what's going on in my mind. And I could be in a good mood, but you won't see it on my face. Like, there's this photo from Christmas of me with his family, and everybody in the family is like, yay! And I'm just like totally stone-faced, not sure what to do with my face, like awkward sitting there, you know?
Yeah.
That's the difference. Like, and it put a lot of things into perspective. Like, all of my social situations, like everything that had gone wrong my whole life, I just thought I wasn't very likable. I thought I was hard to deal with and all these things. And it's like, yes, I am kind of hard to deal with, but like, I just have to do friendships differently than most people. So like, I'm never going to be the type of friend, at least not right now, that can like go out and spend all day every day with her friends and not fucking lose her mind. So like, most of my days are spent in this house that you see me in by myself, working, creating, smoking, being by myself. I live on a property where I'm essentially being a part of a family, and like, even I love the people I live with. They're all great, but even them, I have to take them in such tiny doses, and I feel bad because they like me and they want more of me. But I'm just kind of like, I socialize for an hour and then I run back out to my house like, oh. So.
Well, it's funny that you say all that about being sort of antisocial, because when you and I met, as you know, I was going through my own crisis, and I was feeling very isolated for reasons I can't really talk about right now, but I was. And I was physically isolated, and I was isolated from some important people in my life at the time, and pretty depressed and dealing with that. And you and I ended up talking, as I said, every single day, and it was just keeping each other company, I think.
Yeah, it was keeping each other company, and yeah, I knew like you were going through shit, so we were just helping each other get through shit that like we didn't, because like neither of us really knew what direction our lives were gonna take at that time. Like, a lot of things were really up in the air and stressful, and
it meant a lot to me, like, because I felt like I was helping you, and I really, I respected and admired you so much, and I wanted you, and it seemed like so few people were stepping up to help you. But it was great because of what you did for me. I mean, I had a companion at a time when I really needed one, and you know, I've told you, like, I wanted a daughter, and in fact, I was going to name her Lily.
yeah, and realistically, you got me to trust people again. So like, you know, I've told my boyfriend this, but like, you were the first person that like I met after the murder that like I knew as soon as I met you that you didn't have fucking weird intentions and that you were just you. And I could trust that. And I just had like a gut feeling, and it was like, all right, cool. I can have this friend and I don't have to worry about it. And then like, you know, I was able, you know, the fact that I was able to help you a little bit and see that I was helping you kept me going a little bit, because it was like, okay, I'm not totally worthless. Like, all right, maybe it's worth sticking around in this world to see if there are more people like Sad. And, you know, I credit, when I told my boyfriend why I was willing to open up to him as quickly as I was willing to open up to him, I credit you and I credit Erica Harris, because both of you were texting me like, and talking to me like, girl, go for happy. Fuck the sadness, go for happy, you know. Be smart. And you talked to me, I think we talked on the phone the day I met my boyfriend. And I was freaking out, and you were basically like, you just got to establish your boundaries and keep communication open and you'll be fine. And you were right. Like,
yeah,
my life is for the better for it.
Yeah, so let's do this. Let's talk about happy. You did this, and this is why I'm so fucking proud of you, girl. So you started, when I met you, you were at the bottom. You were at the bottom. You had shit. You had nothing. The cops had taken all your stuff. They had taken your dog. Your husband was dead. You were on the run. You were on the run from Ohio. You were on the run from the Mexican government. You were an illegal immigrant. You were living in a concrete box. You didn't know what. I mean, it's amazing to think back on this.
Honestly, I think back and I like, how did I survive all of that?
I don't know. I don't know, but you did. And so let's remember, let's go through it. Okay, so you went from the box. Someone did give you an apartment to stay in, but that was in some ways worse because you were isolated for how long was it? You were in that apartment by yourself?
I was in that apartment for 6 weeks straight. And that was because the day I moved in there, the cops harassed me, so I was afraid to leave unless I stayed with my friend, basically.
And then you did get help from another friend who finally moved you out of Acapulco to Morelia. I guess you don't live there anymore, so it's fine to say that.
It doesn't.
You don't even live near Morelia. But you went to Morelia, which is a very nice, clean city with very little crime. And I was thrilled because it looked like it's very European, very Spanish. It's sort of the opposite.
It's a beautiful place.
It's a beautiful place. Sure. And so that was the big break. You moved to Morelia, and you had your own apartment, and you were at peace and at least out of physical danger. And you had a lawyer by that point, and you also had a therapist by that point, right? Who you were talking to?
Yeah, the therapist, she was expensive, but she was also like pretty huge in helping me open up to people as well. Because like I felt better when I got out of Acapulco, but I was still like, I kept having the experience where I would go out and I would just like, people would look at me like, oh, look, she's a pretty white tourist basically. And then like, but I would just like, I'd have like this thing going through my head of, but you don't know who I am or what I've been through, type of like, emo mindset for a while. And like, shit, even the day I met my boyfriend, I didn't even want to leave the house. Like I almost canceled the plans where I met him at to like stay in my house and watch Netflix instead. I was this close just because it was like, I was also realizing I was having a hard time relating to people. I tried to go out to like bars with my friends. I realized I fucking hate bars because part of my autism is I can't hear when there's background noise, voices specifically. So like if there's anything going on in the background, I don't hear it. Like boyfriend's had to deal with this because he's tall and we walk down the street and when he talks, I can't hear him.
So that must mean I'm autistic too, because I have the same problem.
Yeah, I mean, you might have some tendencies, and it's not a bad thing. Like there's a lot of strength in being sensitive because that's what it is. It's all about sensitivity. It's not about like having a disorder or having something wrong with you like the mental health game tries to play. It's about just being more sensitive and having to deal with that. So it's like everything from like, for a lot of autistic people, I realize the problem I can't sleep at night is because I'm autistic. So like I fall asleep for a few hours, the weed wears off, and then I can't hear people talking next to me when there's background noise. But in the middle of the night, I can hear a in the corner of my room, and it will wake me up, and it will keep me awake until I make it stop. Oh. I woke up to bamboo creaking outside my window last night, and it kept me up for 3 hours until I realized it was bamboo, and I couldn't do anything about it. Like, So like autistic people, that's why they have noise canceling headphones. They're also weighted blankets. So if you have like a really heavy blanket on top of you, you're more likely to sleep deeply because autistic people are sensitive. If you occupy all the nerves with weight, they can slip into unconsciousness easier. Like, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been playing with something the whole time. It's this rock. I'm stimming, basically. This is what I do in social situations. Before, when people knew me, my skin was really broken out. That was why. It was a stim. I have to do it in social situations. But now I replace it with a rock. So when I have the urge to pick at my face, now I grab the rock and I sit there and I rub it around in my hand. Now my skin's clear. So like there are all these little things that I've just been changing my life in small ways. Another thing is like, it's apparently an autistic trait to want to eat the same thing every day for weeks on end. Because that's what I do. I eat the same damn food every day for weeks on end. And you'll see me, I'm like, this is some gourmet shit. But it's the same damn thing every day.
Speaking of which, we haven't even mentioned another radical thing about you when I met you, which was that you were on the carnivore diet.
Which I'm going to go back to that eventually.
Oh.
I did some damage with the botulism. We haven't talked about botulism yet, but I did some real damage with the botulism.
You also managed to get botulism in the middle of all this too, but you were eating you're not just were on a carnivore diet, but you were basically on an all beef diet.
Yeah, I didn't realize it until a week ago, but it's called the lion diet.
Okay.
So it's beef, salt, water. That's it.
Yeah, so you ate only beef for like the better
And I mean,
part.
like, I felt great.
Yeah.
It was like 2 years of my life.
2 years, you basically only ate beef, which I couldn't imagine doing that. But you changed, and didn't it help? Then you started looking much better, I thought.
I gained weight, and so a lot of people interpreted that as looking better, and like I've kind of leveled off with that. Like I lost a little bit of the weight that I gained, but I haven't lost all of the weight that I gained. So like I am shaped more womanly than I used to be, but like, yeah, it was weird. Like I remember feeling very boyish the whole time because like I had like zero body fat and zero curves and shit. It was weird.
You were very.
But it was great because I had so much energy and my gut health was great. The only reason I quit was I got bored. And then when I like started to deviate and realized I had healed my gut and I wasn't getting sick again, I just kind of kept up with the omnivore thing until I accidentally gave myself botulism.
It's like I'm always worried about you. It's like having a damn daughter. It's the daughter I never, it's the daughter I never had. And named Lily too. I can't believe it. If my son were a girl, as I've told you, his name would be Lily. It's kind of crazy. You're also redheaded, and she probably would have been redheaded. But so you managed to find your way from Morelia to where you live now. We're not going to say where that is, but it is, as I said, in the mountains in central Mexico, in a very beautiful place. And
the most whimsical place ever.
Is it?
It's like the Shire in Mexico, especially right now. So
I cannot wait to come down. I've been trying to visit you for a long time. Just money and time has been the issue, but as soon as I have both, I will be there. But then you're walking through the woods one day when you're still in Morelia, in the hills of around Morelia on a trail, and you see this 6'4" Mexican guy walking towards you, right? And he's by himself, and you start talking, or he starts talking to you, and
he was with another girl, actually.
Oh, was?
That's what's crazy about it is he thinks it was fate. He thinks that girl was essentially pulled into the web of fate to get him to go to Morelia, because he lives like so many hours from here. The fact that I think he just went to Morelia because he had friends there partially. He had like some girl message him and be like, "You're hot, let's meet up." And he was like, "All right, fine, I'll come. I'll bite." So he goes and he's on the side of the hill with her. And by the time he found me, he'd already established like she had issues. She also seemed like, and he's experienced this a lot before because he's so fucking tall and everybody in Mexico is so fucking short. He intimidates the shit out of everybody. So it was one of those things where like she saw him and was like, "Oh my God, you're giant." And it was just awkward from there on out. But like when I saw him, yeah, we just like, he came up to my group and started talking to the guy that I was with. Evidently knew him from like theater type things. And I was just like, okay. And he just joined our group and started talking to me in English, which scared the shit out of me. But Yeah.
And he
Then
turned
involved.
and it, yeah, and he turned out to be almost the anti-John, the opposite of John.
Exactly. And that was when I really, really started to unpack the reality of that situation, you know, because before I was like, oh, John was difficult to live with, but, you know, whatever. And then, like, I started to finally be treated like you're supposed to be treated by somebody with, like, respect and love and admiration. And I was just like, what in the fuck did I do? Like, it was like months of me, like, why did I stay so long in that relationship? Because it was just like, what in the hell? Like, if this is what it's supposed to be, like, why did I deal with that for so long? Like,
You do know
Jesus.
you do know you're not the only person who has stayed in a relationship too long, especially when they started when they were a teenager, right?
Yeah, I know, but it was, I mean, it's easy for me to beat myself up about it because in a lot of ways I see it as my biggest, like, my biggest fuck up, you know? I should have stood up for myself. I just didn't realize, like, instead of standing up for myself, I just tried to change the things about me that annoyed him without realizing that I can't. I am who I am, you know?
Yeah. You know how many relationships I've been in that went too long. I've told you about this, right? Like 5, but I mean, I'm talking about relationships that went on for years too long. So, and those, many of those began when I was in my 20s, 30s, and 40s. So you really need to get over that guilt. But you've gotten over so much of your guilt, and you are able to talk about John in a really clear-eyed way. It's one of the things I'm proudest of you about. It's been amazing to watch you do that.
it's been it's been something that my boyfriend's encouraged me about, basically because, like, when he met me, he was very much like, oh, John was a good guy, he didn't deserve that. But by the time February happened and, like, we were in Acapulco and I was just pointing out all of these, you know, like, the one thing that I noticed about Acapulco when I went back is I kept looking at places like, this is where I used to go when I was mad at John, and I used to go here when I was mad at John, and I used to go here when I was, and I was like, wait, why are these all of my good memories in Acapulco? This is not okay. So, like, by the time we left there, my boyfriend had a serious talk with me, and he was like, look, like, as far as everybody that follows you is concerned, John's a fucking hero, when really he was a big part of why your life was so difficult. He's like, I think if you're going to continue with this book, you need to be honest about that. And that's, like, I think one of the things about my book, when it is finished, that's going to surprise people the most, because it's more about me getting over it and me seeing that relationship for what it was. And it wasn't pretty, and it doesn't put him in a good light. But the
Yeah.
thing is, I saw a meme that described my feelings on that part perfectly a couple months ago. And it was basically like, if you don't like your role in my story, you probably should have acted better.
Yeah. So you're writing a book. You're very busy. You're always very busy. What are you working on besides the book?
I have highlyfunctionalgrowth.com. I redid my website, and it's actually good now. And
I liked it before.
I've been posting on Hive, which is the Steemit replacement, basically.
Okay.
I've been trying to post daily there, but not really keeping up on it. But my main projects are, I'm a partner at the Homestead Guru, so I'm about to start giving consultations through that, which is something I've considered getting into for years, but it's hard for me to, like, establish myself as an expert in things, even though I have, like, lived these things for so long, like things like freelancing and cryptocurrency and living in Mexico. Like, you know, at this point, and weed, like, that's another thing that I kind of am an expert on. Like, I know a lot of shit about it at
Yep.
this point. I can speak from authority. So
But
it's just finding ways to branch out, finding ways to make money. I might start a podcast, probably will. I just haven't figured out
you
specific.
love living where you live up in the mountains.
Yes, yeah. I'm gonna write a post about it because it was just like, it's picturesque, you know. Like, I went for tortillas today, and I go out for tortillas, and I open the gate, and who comes running at me but my favorite, like, pit bull mixed Mexican street dog that I've known since she was a puppy. And she comes trotting with me, and we're literally going over the hill and through the woods to go get some fucking tortillas together. I'm saying hi to Mexicans on the way, and they're all saying hi, Guetta. And I get there and I buy my tortillas, and I have a good relationship with my tortilla ladies. And like this little dog follows me, and sometimes other dogs will bark at me because I'm white, and she chases them off aggressively. So she protects me, you know.
They're racist against you?
And sometimes, you know, yeah, you know, there's agorists here that I absolutely love, like this lady that I've spent literally thousands of pesos at on ice cream over the last 6 months just because she's a badass agorist. And she runs like 4 businesses out of her home, and I respect her. And her husband's the type of guy who gives me free taxi rides because I spend so much money on ice cream. And, you know, the family I live with, they're starting a little taco business, and I'm helping them get that started. And we're going to make like Taco Bell style tacos there once a week and stuff like that. And
awesome.
I'm actually like involved in the community, you know.
Wow. So I was about to ask you, like, wow. I was about to ask, it's always been, since I've known you for a year and a half, it's always been, what's the long plan? Where do you want to end up? Because where you were always sucked. You know, even Morelia had its problems. You know, it was better, a whole lot better than Acapulco. But I was about to ask you again, but you know what? It sounds like you've kind of found where you want to be.
Well, yeah, that's part of the problem, is because now I found where I want to be. And then right after that, I find that there's a way to fix my legal situation, but it requires me moving to a city because I live literally hours from any of the offices that I could do this process from. So I'm just like, I was going to move next month, but now I'm putting it off because I'm like, I'm fucking happy here. I don't want to just, you know, I don't have to worry about immigration out here, so I have time. But it's just like, when you know, I'm happy when I'm putting off fixing my legal situation so I can stay in the country for longer.
So you want to
that's the reality of it.
You want to get Mexican citizenship, right?
Well, that's the end goal, but the first step is getting asylum, which is like a totally legal Mexican process. I just have to prove like why I fled the United States, and then they give me Mexican residency in my old name, so I would retain who I used to be. And then from there, then I just, in 4 years, I can apply to become a citizen.
Right. And now you are still wanted in Ohio on the charges have not been dropped against you. So presumably if you ever return to the United States, they would lock you up, or at least try to. If that gets cleared up, and we've tried to find you a lawyer, by the way, if anyone's listening or watching and you know a good lawyer for Lily to help her with her Ohio case, please hit me up, unregisteredpodcast@gmail.com. But we've had a hard time finding you a lawyer. But if you do get that cleared up, if you do get that charge dropped, which is just a cannabis charge, and it's outrageous because I think it's now legal in Ohio, would you want to return? Would you want to return to the United States?
Maybe for a visit, but no, not to live. Like, I'd have to come under, because like I've thought about like, you know, the pie in the sky, because I'm writing this book, and I'm writing this book to try and make it a bestseller, because I'm not going to go through the effort of writing a book without at least trying to make it go big. Mm-hmm. And in the event that it goes big, well, like those companies generally like you to go and make appearances and shit. So like I would go back in the event of that stuff, but it would always be with the understanding of I'm coming back to Mexico on this fucking day. Because like I don't want to live in the United States again. I also think I'd have a really hard time coping in the United States. So the only way I could go back there is with money to be able to do whatever I want and then leave.
I got to tell you, the United States, there's not a lot of reason to live here right now. I don't see it, and all I think about is moving to Mexico. But I like it. I'm so happy. This has been like, it's been watching an incredible transformation in a person I care a lot about over a year and a half. And it's inspirational. And I think a lot of people watching and listening will be inspired by your story because, as I said, you came from the bottom. And we haven't even talked really much about your childhood, which in some ways was even worse than where you were in that box in Acapulco a year and a half ago. But Lily Forrester, I'm proud of you and I love you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm proud of me too, finally, which is pretty cool. Like, I was a little worried about myself for a long time there, but like looking back, it's just like, I wonder how I survived, but I'm glad that I did, because I don't want to say like what I have now makes all the bad shit worth it, but like it makes me less mad about all of the bad shit that I've gone through, you know? Because it's just like, well, and like now I can look at everything that I've gone through like from kind of a distant lens, you know, okay, that's how things used to be. And now my current, like, my main stressors during the day are me just trying to keep myself on track because I have the attention span of a fruit fly. So it's just like, ooh, editing a podcast. Ooh, smoking some dabs. Ooh, editing a video. Oh, wait, what about the podcast? Shit.
You'll get it done. And pretty soon I'll be down there visiting you. We'll have a good time.
Yeah.
We'll do this in person finally.
Finally, indeed.
All right, lady. You're the best. Keep doing your thing.
Thank you for everything. Because you're a big part of why I wasn't just like, all right, fuck all of this. Because I kind of was. Like, there were a lot of people that were total dicks after the murder. And you were the first one that was just like, fuck all of you, you know.
Well, I saw something special in you and I was right. Damn it.
Yep.
I put a big bet on you, but I was right. Even after you did the crazy thing with the cops. So
I'm glad you didn't cut me off after the cop thing. I didn't like, and you did a good job of being supportive at that time because I didn't know that you were like, who is this crazy bitch until like several months later. And then you like ended up laughing about it. And I was like, oh, I could see that. I would have responded the same way, I think. Like, what in the actual fuck is happening here? Because I've kind of done that to my little brother a couple times.
yeah.
But like, we just need people to be patient with us and to trust that we're going to do what we need to take care of ourselves. And it took me a minute to figure out what the hell that was, but I'm here.
You are here. You are there. You have found your place, and I couldn't be happier. All right, Lily, I'm going to talk to you soon, but thank you for doing this.
Yep.
Bye. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To join the new Renegade University, go to renegadeuniversity.com. To join the new Unregistered Underground, the supporting listeners group for the podcast, go to unregisteredunderground.com.